Public Works. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Can I ask the members present to introduce themselves, please?
Good afternoon, Chair. My name is Derek America. I'm a member of the committee.
Good afternoon, Chairperson, and to other members of the committee and the delegation from the Department of Transport, and also to the Minister. I'm Lulama Mvimbi.
Good afternoon, Chair. Andrikus van der Westhuizen, member of the committee.
Thank
and
you.
Brett Heron, member of the committee.
Thank you, Member Heron. Is there anyone else joining us from members of the standing committee that's here? I see no one else. I'm going to ask Minister Mitchell and his team to introduce themselves, please.
Good afternoon, Chairperson. Good afternoon, members, colleagues. Dalen Mitchell, MEC Transport and Public Works. Through you, Chair, I'm going to ask if the HOD can introduce and the team.
Good afternoon, Chairperson, members of the committee. Jackie Gooch, Head of Department of Transport and Public Works. And through you, Chair, I'll just ask the team to introduce themselves in alphabetical order. Thank you. Starting with Deirdre.
Apologies, HOD, I was waiting for Mr. Lewis. It's Deirdre Ribbenot, Chief Director, Transport Operations.
All right, then let's go through. I'll direct then Advocate Reinicke.
Good morning, Chair and members. Advocate Carl Reinicke, DGG Transport Management in the Department of Transport and Public Works.
Through you, Chair, to Advocate Collins.
Good day, Chair and the Minister. Ricardo Collins, Director responsible for land transport contracts within the Department of Transport and Public Works. Thank you.
Through you, Chair, to Mr. Shane Hindley.
Good afternoon, Chair, Minister and members. My name is Shane Hindley. I'm in the immovable asset management component of the Department of Transport and Public Works. Thank you.
And through you, Chair, the last D2PW staff member for inputs today is Mr. Yasir Ahmed.
Good afternoon, Chair, members, Minister. Yasir Ahmed. I'm responsible for transport regulation and also GMT. Thank you.
Thank you. Is it everyone from the department?
Chair, we do have a couple of other people on the line. I know two members from the ministry as well as our head of communications, if you'd like them to introduce themselves.
Yes, of course, please.
Mr. Roos.
Good afternoon, Chair. Clive Roos, the head of Minister Mitchell's office. Thank you.
Through you, Chair, to Ms. Makoba Somdaka.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ntomboxolo Makoba Somdaka. I'm the spokesperson to MEC Dalen Mitchell. Thank you.
And finally, then, Chair, through to Mr. Bakker.
Thank you, HOD. Thank you, Chair and members. Yandre Bakker, I head up the comms team for Department of Transport and Public Works.
Thank you. And joining me this afternoon is Johannes Kutsia, Nomfundo Msumpela, and Candace Morris, joining me from Parliament. So thank you for everyone for joining us. Without further delay, because we've got a few big presentations that we'd like to see, we're going to start with the Provincial Property Committee, and the guidance was maximum of 40 minutes on the presentation. Then we'll do 20 minutes for question and answers. Minister Mitchell and your team.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, if it's in order, I'm not going to make any opening remarks. I don't know, HOD, if you want to make any opening remarks, but in the interest of time, that we go straight into the presentations and we'll deal with the questions afterwards.
Thank you. That's perfect.
Thank you very much, Chair, Minister. Much appreciated. With us in the meeting, as he introduced himself, Mr. Shane Hindley, responsible for immovable asset management in the department, who is also the chairperson of the Provincial Property Committee. And the request was for the department and ultimately the chair of the committee to present to you the 2019 report that was referred through to the Provincial Parliament as required by the legislation. And so if you're comfortable, Chair, I will hand over to Mr. Hindley to take us through the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. But can I just state there are, I see Mr. Boas here from the Property Committee as well.
Good
Yes,
afternoon. Good afternoon, members. That's correct. I was requested to be here. I'm a member of the Provincial Property Committee on behalf of DCAS. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Go for it, Shane.
Good. Thank you.
But you've lost your presentation now. Okay, there we go.
There we go.
It's on.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson, Minister, HOD.
Chair, sorry.
Oh, apologies.
Yes, continue.
No, Chair, it's Brett here, and I wanted to ask a question before we start.
Okay, you may.
Are members of the external members of the Provincial Property Committee also present?
Can I respond, Chair?
Yes, of course.
Just in terms of Member Aaron's question, the invitation was extended to the members. The only person that I'm aware of, the only external member who indicated that he would not be available to attend is Mr. Margolius, who's in hospital. We have received an indication from Mr. Osman Naka and Mr. Bovain McNabb that they would be attending. I must admit, I can't see now on the screen whether they are here in attendance. I'll have to exit and see whether, but the invitation was definitely extended to in fact, to all members of the committee.
Thank you, because that was the initial request. Can we just check, can you continue with the presentation while somebody else check?
Okay. Shall I continue then, Chair?
Yes.
Okay, sir. Okay. Then good afternoon again, Chairperson and members. This is the 2019 report on the PPC. It covers both the PPC and the Premier's annual reports as submitted to Cabinet and to the Provincial Parliament in terms of the regulations promulgated in terms of the Western Cape Land Administration Act. Just bear with me. Okay, and then the content deals with the constitution and role of the PPC, an overview of the immovable asset management portfolio, and then an overview of the disposals and acquisitions. And although it reflects on the content focus on land restitution claims and human settlements, those did not form part of the reports and so will not be covered in this presentation, Chair. Okay, then I have referred to this, but in terms of the land administration regulations, the PPC is essentially almost a statutory body because it's required to be constituted in terms of the regulations. It comprises of the head of component or a nominated senior official by the head of component, who shall be the chairperson, the heads of provincial departments or senior officials nominated by them, at least 3 people with proven property experience who are not employees or members of the department or organ of state at any sphere of government, and then a person, if any, nominated by the National Minister of Land Affairs, and a person, if any, nominated by the National Minister of Public Works. The role of the PPC in terms of the regulations is to consider a report from the component on acquisitions and disposals of provincial state land, including offers of acquisition and disposal in cases where the value of land as determined by an independent valuer or the amount of the offer exceeds 10 million rand. To consider demolitions, to monitor the administration of provincial state land and to advise the component and the minister on matters relating to the administration of provincial state land, and to perform the functions set out in the regulations and such other functions as the minister considers necessary or expedient for the achievement of the objects of the Act and the regulations, and annually report to the Premier and the Provincial Parliament on its functions and on the matters referred to above. The committee meet for the dispatch of business, adjourn and otherwise regulate its meetings as the chairperson deems fit. The quorum for a meeting shall be 6 persons, provided always that a member contemplated in 1 and 2 shall be present, and the decision of a majority of the members present at a meeting of the committee shall constitute a decision of the committee. And in the event of an equality of votes on any matter, the person presiding at the meeting shall, in addition to his or her deliberative vote, have a casting vote. And the committee shall, as is good order in business, keep minutes of its meetings. Then an overview of the immovable asset management portfolio. For 2019, the immovable asset management portfolio at a total asset value of 39.9 billion rand. It comprised of 5,836 urban or land parcels with 2,148 facilities on it. And the allocation of the land parcels are essentially education as 3,624, health 1,255, and general, which can any department other than education and health is 957. Then rationalization projects underway with the immovable asset register to ensure the integrity of the data and to identify any duplicates and discrepancies. Various reconciliations with the immovable asset registers of other spheres of government have commenced. The rezoning or correction of zoning to permit the current provincial uses, subdividing underutilized or unutilized portions from facilities and disposing of these, consolidation of urban, valuation of high-value properties with a view to reduce the Western Cape government's liability for property rates, and identifying surplus unencumbered assets for the disposal thereof. And then acquisitions, and Chair and members, I don't know whether you want me to go through the definition, but this is how it is defined in both the Act and the regulations in terms of acquisition, to acquire or an acquisition. And then in terms of Guyama, when an immovable asset is acquired or disposed of, best value for money must be realized. And best value for money means the optimization of the return on investment in respect of an immovable asset in relation to functional, financial, economic, and social return wherever possible. Types of acquisitions, it's either can be purchased or leased in, donation, transfer, exchange, servitude, and usufruct rights. Also vesting, public-private partnerships, or expropriations. Then, in terms of the report, there's an overview of acquisitions that were registered in 2019. I don't know whether the members would want me to go through each and every one of these, or whether that would be sufficient to just reflect that there were 10.
We did receive the presentation this morning,
Okay.
so members do have it.
Okay.
But you can just say, I mean, there were 10, for example, we can see on the screen, yeah.
All right, okay, thank you, sir. And then acquisitions that were in the process of being registered, as you can see, 4 and 2 from the previous reports, and then acquisitions by lease, there were 10, so that would be lease agreements entered into. No, that's actually 10, 23, 28 in total. And then lease areas vacated during 2019, there were 3. And then disposals, again, the definition of disposals in terms of the Land Administration Act, and noting here that Guyama acknowledges that disposal is either in terms of the State Land Disposal Act or the Provincial Land Administration Law, which in our case is the Western Cape Land Administration Act of 1998. And then again, what best value for money is. Then disposals registered in 2019. There were 5 that were registered. There were 5 that were in process of being registered. Then disposals that in process of being registered is 8 disposals by lease agreement. So where we the landlord, there were 7. Chairperson and members, that is an overview of the 2019 PPC report. Can I stop sharing or?
Thank you. You can stop sharing. Members, can I see some hands on this report, please? I know this is the first time this committee has received this report, so I presume members will take it with them and go study it in detail, and we'll be putting some written questions. I see Mr. Heron. Mr. McNabb, can I ask you just to switch off your camera for this phase, please? Thank you, Mr. Heron.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, I think that my first question is if we can get a decent copy of the report. I was trying to read the report that was sent to us, and when you get into the detail of the acquisitions, disposals, the recommendations from the PPC, you can't read the detail in that report. So it's badly scanned, and if we can please get a proper copy of that report. Then if I may just ask, in terms of the presentation, there was Mr. Hindley referred to 5,000 odd land parcels held by the Western Cape Provincial Government, and then indicated 3,000 odd were with the education, 1,900 with health, and then 900 odd were with general, and then he said with other departments. But is the 900 with other departments, or does the Public Works as the custodian department have additional land parcels, or is that 900 in the custody of the Provincial Public Works Department? Then, if I may just ask, in terms of the legislation and the department, I mean, is there does the department have a custodian's immovable asset management plan? And if so, where is it, and how do we get to see it? Because it as I understand it, it is required in terms of Guyama, and included in that plan needs to be a performance assessment of the various assets, the maintenance plan for the various assets, and what the cost of that maintenance is. So where is the custodian's immovable asset management plan? Then in terms of the Western Cape Land Administration Act, there are a number of requirements that I can't find any evidence of. The first is the consolidated register that must be accessible or open for inspection by the public. So where is that consolidated register, and how can the public get access to it? And then there is reference in the Western Cape Land Act to the land capital account within the Provincial Revenue Fund. If we can get an explanation as to what is in there, and what is that land capital fund or account used for, and how is it performing? How does the province use that within the Provincial Revenue Fund? So those are my questions for now, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've just got a question. I presume the land with the Department of Education and the Department of Health include all the schools and not only just the physical properties where their offices are. If you can just clarify that for me. And the second question, from inception phase, say if you identify a piece of land between Beaufort West and Laingsburg, what is the policy process? If you can, under 2 minutes, what is that process for that land to be identified, for that land to come to the department, and for that land to come to the property committee? And how long does that take? And those are just my questions on this particular matter. Thank you. You can respond.
Chairperson.
Sorry, Honorable, I didn't see your hand, but you can go quickly.
Okay, my apologies. Thank you very much, Chairperson. Just also, I thought it was me who was suffering from reading the presentation, because it was, or the presentation that was sent to us is really of very poor quality. If maybe we can have a very clearer version of the presentation that can be sent to us later. But I wanted to check on the pieces of acquisition of land. I tried to look, maybe I might have not seen it. I know at some point we were at the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, we're discussing the issue of Durenbach land, but then it should have fallen not under acquisition, but under disposal. But then I could not see that, or maybe it is not falling into this. Was it not supposed to be on the list as a piece of land that we have disposed of? That's just my question.
Thank you. Honourable van der Westhuizen.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Chair, my question is regarding the residential properties and housing development. I do know that the Provincial Department of Human Settlements sometimes also do residential developments and sometimes even take over projects from local governments. And my question is just, are there any of these properties that have already been allocated to beneficiaries, but where the official title deeds transfer process has not taken place? And how, if so, how do we justify the fact that there are then properties still registered in the name of province for which I presume there are no rental agreements? What is the situation in this regard? Thank you.
Thank you. I see no further hands. You can answer.
Thank
Through
you,
Chair.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, if I may, Chair, I just wanted to check, are you comfortable for Mr. Hindley just to pick up on the questions, and if
Yes, of
there's
course.
anything that I may need to add, I can do so?
Yes, of course, yeah.
Thank you. My apologies, Shane.
Thank you, HOD. Thank you, Chairperson and members. With Member Heron's questions, well, firstly, the issue around a proper copy of the report or of the presentation, that I'm sure we can deal with. Then the issue around the land parcels. Just to start off with, first and foremost, is that the custodianship of the immovable asset portfolio has been assigned in terms of properties that are not, or the non-housing land, have been assigned to Transport and Public Works, and the non-housing land would then include health, education, and what I refer to as general. So the property portfolio consists of land allocated, or land parcels allocated to health and education, and to what we refer to as general. Those are the three categories. There isn't another category. Then, in terms of the legislation, I can confirm that there is a custodian asset management plan which gets submitted annually, and that plan gets submitted to the provincial treasury, and I'm sure that that can be availed. So there is I can confirm that there is a custodian asset management plan. Then in terms of the question around a consolidated register, there is also, I can confirm, an immovable asset register. And in terms of access, at this moment in time, if the arrangement is that whoever wants to view the register can make an appointment, and that person or persons can view the register. The issue under the land capital account, as referred to in the legislation, I am not aware that that account was actually created, and as far as I am aware, that account has been replaced by what is, and here I stand to be corrected, but by the Asset Finance Reserve, which is managed by the Provincial Treasury. Then the question around the land in the schools, both the land and infrastructure or improvements are reflected in the immovable asset register, and there's only one immovable asset register, which is with the Department of Transport and Public Works. Then the member asked around the acquisition process. It depends, Chairperson, on the value of the property. If the value of the property is up to 5 million, the process in all three cases, and if I say all three cases, whether it's up to 5 million in value or up to 10 million in value, or whether it exceeds 10 million, evaluation is required, and that is prescribed in the Land Administration Act and regulations. Then there are different levels of approval. If it's up to 5 million rand, it is the approval authority is the head of component after consultation with the minister. If it exceeds 5 million but it doesn't exceed 10 million, it is by approval of the minister. If it is if the value exceeds 10 million, or if the value exceeds 10 million, it has to go to the property committee for a recommendation before it can go to the provincial cabinet, because the provincial cabinet is then the approval authority for that acquisition. Then in terms of the time that it would take, if obviously because if it's less than 5 million or up to 10 million, because it's within the department, that can take probably between 2 to 3 months. But if it has to go to cabinet, it can take, because of all the role players involved, it can probably take between 4 to 6 months for that process. Then Member Mvimbi asked around the Doornbach land. I must confess, I'm not familiar with that particular property, sir. What I can do is I can check and we can revert, but it doesn't sound familiar at all. Then Member van der Westhuizen asked around residential developments and properties. Whilst we have made land, and I can confirm that the department has made land available to the Department of Human Settlements for residential developments, the only development where we as a department, as far as I can recall, is involved in terms of a residentially led development is in the at the former Conradio Hospital site, which is currently being developed. The other properties are available to our Human Settlements Department for residential developments. I don't know whether I've covered all the questions posed, Chair.
You did. There was just a follow-up question. Mr. Gooch, do you want to respond quickly before I hand over to Member Herrera?
If I may, thank you, Chair. Perhaps just to clarify the point that Mr. Hindley flagged and responded to in relation to the land capital account. So just for clarification, it's my understanding that, of course, the Land Administration Act from a Western Cape point of view is many years old, and understanding that we work within the context of the PFMA and its particular provisions. And certainly since I've been with the department for many years now, what happens is the Provincial Treasury holds what, as Mr. Hindley mentioned, the Asset Finance Reserve, so within the Provincial Revenue Fund. And what they then do is they tag the funds specifically from a property point of view. So any revenue in terms of the kind of sale, if potentially there was a sale of property where there was revenue coming in, it lands up being tagged. And or then also a certain allocation, and the members would probably recall when you deal with our budgets on an annual basis, there's generally an allocation in terms of an earmarked amount within Programme 2 of our department, where there is a provision made for funds for the acquisition of properties. So the purchase, generally, when you ask for the list, you generally find that they're for health and for education purposes. So given, I get a set, my understanding of the financial situations is that as things have shifted over time within the financial legislation, the land capital account was something that was then closed down, if it ever existed, but certainly isn't a separate account kept within the revenue fund. It's kept within the Asset Finance Reserve, as Mr. Hindley has mentioned. So I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Aaron. Before you ask again, I see Mr. McNabb's hand went up. If you wanted to add something to that, because he sits on the Property Committee. Mr. McNabb?
Thank you, Chair. Am I heard?
Yes, I can hear you, sir.
Thank you. So, Shane, if I may, we've all, I think, certainly for myself, received this a little late, but I just wanted to ask a question. In your report, you talk about the assets under immovable assets being 39.9 billion. Huh?
Sorry, Mr. McNabb, are you asking a question or you want to give some input on behalf of the Property Committee?
It's a question.
Oh, no, sorry, Mr. McNabb, we unfortunately don't work like that. You serve on the Property Committee, right?
Yes.
So you're giving input into the committee.
Well, I can. Well, let me lay it out, Chair, if you don't mind, and then you can decide how it's used.
That's fine. Go ahead.
In the annual report for the department, the assets are shown at 78.4 billion. That's my understanding, is they're roughly 80 billion. Yet on this report, they're detailed as just under 40 billion. So I'm not sure what that difference is. I would, that would be one thing. And the other is, certainly I've, for a long time, Provincial Property Committee, I mean, it's easy, the schools and the hospitals, but I'm particularly interested in how that general is made up. And Shane's also aware, I mean, there are residential properties, Shane, correct me if I'm wrong, there are residential properties, I mean, it's been correctly outlined. The custodianship of the assets is the Premier's. It's a delegated authority. It's split across two departments at the moment. And generally, the residential properties and the Western Cape Land Development Fund are with human settlements. But there are also residential properties that are sitting in public works as byproduct residential properties that are sitting in public works as assets.
Okay, that's fine. Before Shane responds, I'll allow that. Can Member Aaron just put his question because he had a follow-up question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask, I mean, first of all, why we are in August 2021 and dealing with the 2019 report, which if you read it, it refers to stuff that was taking recommendations from the PPC that took place in 2017. So why does it take? It's not a very active report. I'm not wondering why it's taking so long, and when we will get the 2020 report. I also wanted to follow up I put my hand up as a follow-up question to Mr. Hindley's answer to my question around the split between health, education, and general. And he said, well, it's just called general. But my understanding is that there are user departments and then there are custodian department. There's custodian department is public works. So is Transport and Public Works the custodian of all provincial properties, excluding human settlement properties, even if they are being used by health or education? And then the split that Mr. Hindley had in his presentation doesn't match the report. The report says education has 3,624, Department of Transport and Public Works 1,255, Department of Health 338, and Department of Agriculture 264, and Cape Nature 198. So those are not the numbers that were presented in the presentation. So why is there this discrepancy? And I'm trying to understand the difference between the public works acting as a custodian of assets that are actually not with a user department. Where are those numbers? I think the land capital account, I think, has been clarified by the HOD, other than to say that obviously the Western Cape Land Administration Act, if it's no longer in line with the PFMA, then that should surely be amended. But thank you.
Thank you. Before the HOD reply, members, has any other questions from the other members? Member Mvimbi, you wanted to clarify?
Sorry, Chairperson, I was muted.
Okay.
The question I wanted to ask, Chairperson, I wanted to check whether, at some point at the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, we dealt with the acquisition and the disposal of a land called Dorenbach, but I can't remember the F numbers. On the land that has been disposed of by the Department of Transport and Public Works to the Department of Human Settlement and later to the City of Cape Town. I was expecting that I will also see it here on the list of the land that has been disposed of. But maybe I could not see it. Maybe that's why I was asking whether are the officials familiar with that land, because it's the matter that we've dealt with that is on the disposal of land. So I wanted to check whether is that land that has been disposed of also on the list of the disposed land, because I could not see it unless it's named something else. And if you look at the disposals that on the list that have disposals, there's I was just on that list now. There is a list that has got it just have Evans, a lot of Evan numbers, but it does not show where it is. But basically my main question was on is that land of Dorenbach also part of the list of the land that has been disposed of?
Okay, thank you. There seem to be no further hands. HOD and your team can respond.
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps I'm going to pick up the broader question that Member Heron raised around custodianship and so on, and then ask Mr. Hindley just to pick up on the questions around the numbers from an OEF point of view, with the differences between the presentation and the content of the report. So perhaps let me to respond, if I may, then to Member Heron's question. You're quite right, Member Heron. The Department of Transport and Public Works is a custodian within the Western Cape Provincial Government, of which also the Provincial Department of Human Settlements is also a custodian. My understanding from the history, of course, is that the Provincial Department of Human Settlements is the custodian of property that used to be held within a land development process. And there's a particular name that's usually attached to that, and Shane can probably remind me, but my brain has gone blank suddenly as I'm speaking. So there are certain properties for which human settlements are the custodian, and their purpose is around human settlement development. Our department is then the custodian for all other Western Cape government properties, whether they are then used, and you're quite right, as users, whether they're used by education, by health, by Cape Nature, our own department, agriculture, and so on. So within the urban then, the total of and properties that are available, and remembering, of course, that sometimes let's use an example, if I may, of Groote Schuur Hospital, just as an example. It's one facility, but of course it may be across a number of urban. And Shane did allude in the presentation to a process that we're going through to slowly but surely look at consolidating where we can and taking key sites and properties around that, so we can start to clear out some of the aspects across the immovable asset register. So we are the overall custodian, and then properties are allocated for users. In some instances, of course, there are properties that remain unallocated and are therefore not even used by DTBW. So still sit then within the custodianship of our department. And then there needs to be a decision taken around if it's something that cannot be used or isn't identified to suit the purpose of any of the provincial departments. And then through the necessary processes and procedures, as was alluded to, we may look at disposing of that particular property. Or potentially we have a property that has been earmarked for, let's say, education's use, but understanding that they only are going to be able to deliver a school on that property in 5 years' time or 10 years' time. It depends in terms of their plan and the budgets that are available. So we do have to at times hold on to property that's vacant, but in anticipation of being used by another user, particularly obviously the vacant properties. So that does hopefully, perhaps then to come back to your question about the numbers, there are then of the total land parcels a certain amount that are used for education purposes. Again, remembering that consolidation element to it. The same with health. And then those that are allocated 900 in terms of the general will be urban that make up the Cape Nature facilities, the agriculture facilities, our own and others. So that fits in what we call the general portfolio, where we haven't expressly broken down necessarily in terms of what we've got for the presentation, but the asset register does indicate the user to whom it has been allocated. So hopefully that just clarifies that particular point through you, Chair, as far as the portfolio and us being the custodian. And then just to jump to, if I may, Chair, Member Heron's point around the Land Administration Act, you're quite right. And we are actually in the process of preparing a new piece of legislation, the Western Cape Immovable Asset Management Bill. It has been some time in the making, given all of the hiccups that we've had along the way, just generally in terms of needing to focus on a whole host of other matters. But certainly the Immovable Asset Management Bill is something, and that will then, the intention is to replace the Western Cape Land Administration Act with something that's more current and obviously fits in line with further provisions of GIAMA, the PFMA and other pieces of legislation. So through you, Chair, if it's possible, I'd like to ask Mr. Hindley, excuse me, if he could just clarify the numbers. And I imagine that the value difference is potentially something between replacement value versus the value on the asset register. But I'm sure that Mr. Hindley can explain that particular point as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just quickly, Mr. Heron, is there a new hand?
Yes, it is. I'm sorry. I did have COVID, and apparently brain damage is one of the everlasting side effects. But I'm still not getting the numbers in the general. And so I just had a follow-up in response to Ms. Gooch's comment. Maybe I can do it now.
Can Mr. Henley first respond, please?
Sure.
Yeah. Mr. Henley, you can respond.
Apologies, Chair, I was muted. No, I just wanted, in terms of the numbers that Member Heron has pointed out, I need to correct myself. If I can, in terms of the presentation, if I can just go, if I may just do this, if you don't mind. So this is what Member Heron was referring to, Chairperson, in terms of the numbers. 3,624 to education, transport and public works 1,255, health 338, Department of Agriculture 264, and Cape Nature 198. So that slide needs to be corrected. Apologies for that. But this is as per the report, Chairperson.
Okay, but you're going to send us that report, right?
Well, the report is with the committee, Chairperson. Well, if it isn't, we can send a copy of the report again.
Thank you. Did you also answer Mr. McNabb's question?
Mr. McNabb.
Asking about the 80 billion versus 40 billion.
It is at a particular point in time, Chairperson, and I just wanted to also say that in terms of the valuation per the immovable asset register, we normally would use the municipal valuation as opposed to the market valuation, because it just becomes unaffordably expensive to do so. And it is a particular point in time, so the value as at 2019 and the value as at 2021 would also obviously differ. And it is the asset register value as opposed to the replacement value.
Okay, that's a fair explanation.
Can I just also then just, and I don't know whether Member Heron still has a question around the custodian role. I got the same, I still wanted to post another question, or was that dealt with?
Okay, Member Heron, you want to go quickly?
Yes, please, Chair. So I was saying, I'm still not grasping this. I mean, the presentation lumped about 900 urban or land parcels or facilities. I'm not quite sure under general, which is not very helpful because it's hard to determine what is generals. Now, when you read the report, could include agricultural land that is allocated to Cape Nature. But what general does not tell us then is what land, what facilities, what properties are surplus to needs, and is there a disposal plan for those? And if I may just go further and say, I recently asked a question about the number of old school buildings that were no longer in use, and the Department of Education referred me to Transport and Public Works. Then I asked Transport and Public Works Minister a question around the number of schools that have been closed by the Education Department. Would those school buildings be regarded under education, even though they're no longer used by education, or are they under general? And where would you find a plan for what their future would be? And that's my two questions. And thirdly, I'm still waiting to understand why we're dealing with 2019 in almost the end of 2021.
Thank you. I see Mr. Bovine hand went up again. Mr. Bovine.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, Shane, it doesn't have to be done now, but I think it's important that we understand the reconciling difference between the 40 billion and the 80 billion, and it can't just be timing of a year or valuation. It might be cost versus market value. But I think for all our sake, we should understand that and be consistent, because, 40 billion is quite a number. And then the DG was referring to, I believe, the old National Housing Trust, which was what the apartheid government seized land under. And some of that land still sits in Zonneblom in the Cape, and that now sits in an entity which is Human Settlements is the custodian of, and it's the Western Cape Housing Development Fund.
Okay, thank you for that. Whose hand is up? HOD.
Chair, thank you, and let me thank Mr. McNabb for clearing my foggy memory. I appreciate that. Just through you, Chair, to respond to Member Heron's question about why you're dealing with the 2019 report now. So I do have to acknowledge what we do is we run on a calendar year cycle as opposed to the financial year in terms of these reports. This particular one, of course, we did, unfortunately, as a team, I need to take that responsibility, end up delaying its production and processing through the PPC and others, given that during the COVID period in terms of 2020, the beginning parts of COVID, through from March for a number of months, Shane and members of the immovable asset management team were unfortunately very focused on dealing with and responding to the quarantine and isolation requirements and responsibilities for that as part of DTPW's response. So I have to acknowledge that there was a delay on our department side in completing the 2019 report, submitting it through the PPC, as well as then through to the Provincial Cabinet, because as you could see, it's the PPC's report as well as then the Premier's report that needs to be tabled to the Parliament. And so that particular process was delayed from our side. We then did finally, earlier this year, get it signed off in terms of the 2019 report to try to make good on our oversight. And the team are also just busy finalizing the 2020 report to get it through the PPC process, through to Cabinet for the Premier's consideration and sign-off, and then submission through to the Provincial Parliament. So hopefully within the next month or two, we should have the 2020 report and then be caught up, Chair. So I have to take ownership for the delay. My apologies.
Thank you, Mrs. Good. I think the whole country didn't know what to expect that first 6 months of COVID-19, not the whole country, the whole world. So one can forgive you and the department. I know that your department was extremely busy with providing accommodation. People went into isolation. I know people from Mitchell's Plain that actually went to some of the facilities that you guys arranged. So well done for that. Colleagues, we will ask for more written details on it. Like I said, this is the first time we received this report, so we can study.
Sorry, Chair.
Member Heron?
My follow-up question hasn't been answered. Ms. Gooch had dealt with the 2020, but I'm still trying to understand this general and...
Oh, okay. Mrs. Gooch?
Sorry, my apologies for missing that particular one. So yes, I think what we should do is take it as certainly as an acknowledgement that what you're looking for as a committee is more detail in this report. In terms of the detail, the department, of course, does have that as it's registered. I indicated on the immovable asset register. And we can certainly make sure that within the 2020 report that comes through to you, there's a great degree of breakdown. This is the first time that I think our department has actually interacted with a standing committee on one of these reports. We have had previous reports that were submitted through to the Parliament, but I don't think they were ever referred formally to the standing committee. So certainly through your chair, we take it as a constructive request in terms of the greater degree of breakdown that you'd want of that number of properties. And we can provide it even in a written response to you, but we will also make sure that there's more detail articulated in the report for the 2021.
Thank you, Mr. Aaron. Do you want to close on this matter?
I do. I just want to understand the one aspect around general. As I said earlier, I asked a question about schools that had been closed by the Education Department. Would those school buildings now be in the custodianship of the Department of Transport and Public Works? Would they still be under your education numbers, or are they now in the general numbers because the user department is no longer using them for education? And do they fall into the category where you are now looking for a future for them? And so where is that information?
Okay, Mrs. Gooch.
Through you, Chair, I'd like to just ask Shane to confirm if my understanding is correct in terms of the detail. We are the custodian, have always been the custodian, and would remain the custodian, whether the property is handed back to DTPW because it no longer suits education's purpose. So it then comes into our portfolio. My understanding, and Shane can correct me, is that it would then fit into that general provision. And we would then go through a process to identify what alternate potential use, if there is another provincial department potentially that may find a need for that property, or we then go through the process, potentially the municipality would like to use it and so on. So we would then follow the necessary procedures around potential disposal. But Shane can confirm or deny if I've misunderstood, Chair, in terms of that provision of the 900, if I may ask him just to clarify.
Okay. Mr. Handley.
Chairperson, I can confirm what the HOD has shared with the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, team, for that. Certainly the first time that we have seen that report, and I'm sure members will send more questions on this report. Colleagues, can we move on to the presentations? Minister Mitchell and your team.
Yes, sure. Yes, Chair. Which presentation would you like to deal with first?
Blue dot and then red dot.
So blue dot and red dot, Chair, we'll deal with as one presentation, and then Mr. Ahmed will take us through an update on the taxi violence, if that's
perfect. Thank you.
All right, Chair, through you, I'm going to ask HOD if it's in order, if we can hand over straight to Ms. Rebenauer, or who's going to deal with the presentation?
Absolutely, I think it will be Mrs. Rebenauer. Deirdre, is it yourself or Advocate Collins?
It's me, HOD, Minister.
Thank you.
All right, so I'll just kick off with a 5-minute video, if that's in order.
Today, we as the leadership of the industry in the Western Cape are humbled and honored to be celebrating the Blue Dot project here today. It's our flagship project.
Industry, it's a very important section of the transport section because we are transporting more than 60% in South Africa.
The Blue Dot Incentive Program is aimed at, first and foremost, the commuter. It's to give them safe, reliable transport. We do this by incentivizing the drivers and the operators of the minibus taxi industry to adhere to standards.
It will definitely contribute towards a safer road environment where these drivers will be trained how to work with people, how to address people, and they will be monitored by virtue of a tracker system that will make sure that they comply with the Road Traffic Act.
They will be monitored in terms of harsh braking, they will be monitored in terms of speeding, they will be monitored in terms of route adherence, so that they don't deviate from the operations which the operating licenses allow them to. But also they will be subjected to their own commuters that will be able to rate the standard of service that they are able to get, which hasn't been done before.
So what is happening here today is that we are training the operators on Blue Dot operations. We're going through basically how the program works, how they will be compensated, how the terms and conditions affect them, and also how we're going to be monitoring the system for performance.
The training is actually so that the government and the authorities can be assured that all operators are well aware of what is required. It will eventually bring the industry to a certain way that will please all and everybody, and especially the commuters.
We're also currently installing vehicle tracking systems in their vehicles, and that tracking systems are able to pick up the behavior of how a driver actually performs on the road.
As soon as a vehicle comes in, we ensure that he has signed the terms and conditions. We park 2 meters away from each other, and then we start sanitizing the vehicle. Also, our team will then come in, and we will then register the vehicle and see if the vehicle is in order inside as well as outside.
We all know that the minibus taxi industry is the heartbeat of the economy. Let today be the start of safe, reliable, and dignified transport system.
So I'm very briefly going to just take you through the registration. As you know, from a regional company perspective, when you guys log in, you can see the exact same information specific to your region.
So what the first screen does is basically an overview of all the vehicles across the regions, where they're located, where they currently are, and these are actually live tracking feeds that's coming through of the vehicles that has currently been fitted.
It's going to be good for us, for drivers, and for the bosses. I think it's going to be better, yeah.
It's the first time in history that this is happening, that the government is working with the taxi industry. But I feel it's a good thing, yeah.
First and foremost, I want to say thank you to the department, and I want to thank all my leaders here in the regional companies that has been registered. It's the first that we have regional companies for the assistance with the government. We are now moving. It's not just Blue Dot. Blue Dot is not just a vehicle. It's about formalizing this industry. Change is inevitable, and change is going to take us to the next level.
It's been an incredibly good year. We are very thrilled with what we've achieved so far. So thank you for everybody for sacrificing as much as you do.
This innovation is going to make a massive difference to our clients, to our citizens, to the people of this province. And if we can make a difference in this partnership through this kind of innovation to those clients, we really start to make a difference in the lives of people. Because if we get that right, then what we do is we start becoming a world-class region where public transport is efficient, safe, cost-effective, and the first choice, not the second choice.
Thank you, Chairperson. I'll now, if it's okay, go straight into the presentation.
Yeah, that's fine.
I trust everyone can see the screen. What I'll do today is just provide an overview of the Blue Dot service, some progress and key achievements to date. Some of the implementation challenges will also be highlighted, our idea of a way forward, and then just a brief overview of the Red Dot service and progress to date with that service. I think everybody in the room, Chairperson, will agree that there really is an urgent need for us to improve the state of public transport services in our country. The minibus taxi services are, at this present moment, the most widely used mode of public transport, but unfortunately, it's characterized by quite poor quality service, and it also receives very little financial support from government in its entirety. There is an increased focus by our President, as well as the National Minister of Transport, on improving, supporting, and potentially subsidizing the minibus taxi services. While there remains a very critical need to improve rail, and specifically rail as the backbone of a transport service as well as bus services, it's really important that we take action to improve the minibus taxi service as the biggest mover of people or the masses at the moment. So Blue Dot is really our proposed approach to improve the minibus taxi industry, and it's a pilot that will run over 9 months, building on the success of the Red Dot service. Why is it important for the minibus taxi industry and for us as government to ensure that there's action in this regard now? Because it provides access to opportunities for about 700,000 passengers a day across our province. This accounts for about 2/3 of public transport trips. About 15,000 legal vehicles are used, upwards to about 20,000 if one includes illegal operators. They generate on average about 6 billion rand revenue per annum. This includes 10,000 small businesses and employs about 40,000 workers. It's 100% black owned. However, this industry only receives about 1% of public funding for public transport. Blue Dot is an innovative minibus taxi improvement initiative. It's an incentive program to shift behavior and transform services. Some of the objectives of the program is to create that safe, reliable, dignified, and affordable service for our passengers. We use technology and incentives to shift driver behavior and then also improve vehicle compliance and safety. The aim is to also address taxi violence, as has been seen in the last couple of weeks, as well as illegal operations on the road. And very importantly, it's also to support the formalization of the industry at present. So how does this work? It was very important for us to appreciate and respect the current structures within the taxi industry and not change the operating model too much. So participation is across 3 layers. So you have Santaco Western Cape, which is the provincial representative body. So we've established Umanyano Travel Services, which is a company that represents that level. Under Santaco, there are 8 regions. Each region has a number of associations. So we've established regional companies, and operators are then represented by this regional companies. Some of the key features of the program is, number one, it's voluntary. Nobody's forced to participate. Operators, they don't need to give in their operating license or vehicle. So it's very different to the sort of My City type of model. There are direct payments to UTS, which is the provincial company, the 8 regional companies, as well as operators. Operators are then responsible for managing and paying their drivers. Routes for the pilot were selected by the regions and then vetted by government based on certain principles we have set. All participants are able to access information in terms of their performance on a daily basis, so they can understand where they need to improve or where they're doing well. Participants are also monitored through a combination of onboard tech as well as on-the-ground field monitors. Some key benefits to the program is that this onboard vehicle tracker provides some really invaluable data to government that we've never had before. The passenger feedback platforms for rating the service is also a first of its kind. Then there is driver and operating training programs, and this is vital to support the change in behavior on the ground. We do also require a minimum level of service each day. So the way industry operates is that during the peak times is when there's focused, most of the capacity is on the route, but off-peak, you won't find much minibus taxi vehicles. So we have put down minimum kilometers per region that they need to drive just to ensure that there is an off-peak service being delivered. We do periodic vehicle inspections, and that's at our discretion. We also require for companies to prevent illegal operations and industry violence, specifically with a focus on these blue dot routes. And then, as mentioned before, the formalization of industry into these company structures. The Blue Dot Taxi pilot was approved by Provincial Cabinet in September 2020. The pilot will run over a 9-month period. We went live on the 15th of May 2021, and we will be in a calibration period up until the end of August. We're glad to inform the committee that the participation in terms of the program is by the provincial company, UTS, and as well as all 8 regions in the province. This equates to approximately 600 operators and plus minus 1,300 vehicles from across the province. In terms of the 6 metro regions, they were allocated 200 slots per region, and in the 2 non-metro regions, it was 50 vehicles per region. This graphic just demonstrates the coverage of the Blue Dot program at the moment. The different colors represents the regions in the metro, and one can see the good coverage. There's about 187 routes that's operational at the moment. So how does this work? In order to be considered eligible and to join this program, participants must achieve and then also maintain what we refer to as green status. Operators with green status will receive a payment based on how well they perform against a different set of performance standards that measures the driver behavior. Performance is then scored using a star rating system. So the more stars, the higher the potential for earning. So standards are measured using a bespoke tech system that's been developed in-house. So green status is quite important in order to be considered for any performance incentive. So as Umanyano, it was important that they were signed up and a functioning Blue Dot participant. And we also needed to ensure that there was appropriate governance structures in place. And this had to be aligned with their leadership structures. The very same requirement was for each regional company as well. Then from Umanyana's perspective, we needed to show how they're actively discouraging recruitment of illegal operators. They also need to intervene and address taxi violence in the province, which they've done over the last couple of weeks. All regional companies must also be in green status for the provincial company to be considered for any payment. And then more importantly, there needs to be a minimum number of green status operators. By the end of June, we've needed at least 50% of the allocation to be operational. So in terms of a regional company, they also need to ensure that there's no legal operators on the Blue Dot routes in that particular region. There must be no taxi violence in the region, and they also need to have a percentage of green status operators. And as of the end of June, there was full compliance by all regions in terms of green status operations. From a driver perspective, it's important that they sign their terms and conditions. They must have a valid PRDP and driver's license. They must have completed the driver training we've developed, and they must be driving a Blue Dot vehicle. From an operator perspective, they also need to sign their T's and C's, the document that outlines what's expected from them. They need to be in good standing with the association, have a valid operating license being registered in the association, and have a roadworthy vehicle. There must be a tracker installed, and that tracker must be functional. The vehicle needs to be branded and the necessary information provided displayed at all times. They also operator needs to ensure that there is a green status driver driving their vehicles, and also adhere to the minimum daily kilometers that's been set by government. Just in terms of the performance standards, what we check every day is speeding, harsh driving, route adherence, and then we also track the user feedback via the USSD platform as well as the WhatsApp line. What's important to note here is that company payment is influenced by how well the driver and operator performs. So it's a build-up situation. This is underpinned by some hardware and systems. So the hardware is the actual vehicle tracker in the minibus taxi. And then each driver is given an identification tag to tag into the system on a daily basis. This is then monitored via a Blue Dot apps that we've created, so that every day there's a daily status and incentive SMS notification sent out to the driver, to the operator, to the regional company, as well as Umanyana, the provincial company. Some of the progresses and challenges today, so key achievements today, is that we've received provincial political leadership support, and it's been extremely positive to date. We've had industry engagements that's been concluded with all regions, so full participation by each region and the taxi industry as a whole in the province. To date, we've had about 250 engagements with industry, and this includes UTS and all the regional companies since November 2020. It's 250 and counting, Chairperson. We've, as mentioned, established 8 new companies representing the 8 taxi regional councils in the province. All regions as well as UTS have signed their terms and conditions to participate in the program. Operator sign-up has gone really well, and we're almost at 1,000 vehicles and counting that's been registered. The vehicle fit-out, and this includes tracker installation, branding, and the inspections, commenced in April, and we're now at about 886 vehicles that have been fitted by the end of July. The operator and driver training program has commenced and proceeding well, with about 447 operators and 654 drivers trained by the end of July. We've had to put special arrangements in place during lockdown level 4, given that there was a prohibition on gatherings. UTS as well as the regional companies have established or are in the process of establishing operational centers, And this is so that they're able to monitor operations of the performance of drivers and operators on the ground. We've also developed a bespoke vehicle branding so that you'd have noticed the Blue Dot vehicles. There's tech systems that's required to monitor performance, and this is being completed. And as mentioned before, we're in a calibration phase until the end of August. The first data from these trackers have been received and analyzed. It really does provide deep insight into the operations of the minibus taxi industry like we've not experienced before. It gives good baseline information to monitor and ensure improvements over time. And it allows us to identify off-route operations, route invasions, and we do believe over time that this behavior will be shifted. The data clearly shows where vehicles are operating and allows us to identify if they're off-route as mentioned, and this is a powerful tool in order to plan our law enforcement activities as well. Then using the data, we also start to identify areas of good and bad performance. We work with the regions and operators on a daily basis to ensure that they are understanding the SMSs they've received so that we can improve performance. Participants, as I've mentioned, in the operational center at all these regional companies have access to our ITS platform. So this is where they can see where their fleets are, the performance apps and the SMSs that are provided daily based on the star ratings that each driver and operator is receiving. So as mentioned, feedback and communication between government and these companies are critical as well as the operators. But Blue Dot is definitely not a quick fix. It's going to take time to shift behavior. But again, I do have to highlight that it has provided some deep insights into the taxi industry and the way they operate. We also have a passenger and public feedback system, which is operational. We've received over 17,000 hits or ratings that we use to show industry and operators what their commuters are saying. So there's been a large-scale marketing campaign underway and will continue throughout the pilot so that commuters and the general public are aware of what can be expected in terms of the program. Just to summarize, there has been, since we've gone live, there's a lot of firsts that this program has achieved. It's a first establishment of provincial and regional companies in the country. We've got the entire provincial taxi industry leadership to sign up to this initiative. We've also ensured that almost 600 operators and counting are legally compliant. It was the first of a kind where we've installed trackers and received this kind of data for almost 900 taxis and counting. We were the first to establish a user feedback platform. And then lastly, also to ensure that 640 and counting drivers are registered, licensed, and trained. There's definitely been some implementation challenges, Chair. So in order to become eligible and to participate and maintain green status, there's about 20 steps that each operator needs to go through. So this has been quite time-consuming, underestimated initially, and has required a lot of assistance from government to these operators. Just in terms of tax compliance, having the necessary bank accounts opened, just to mention a few. Then in terms of the industry challenges, every region has their own dynamic. So in one particular region, Mitchell's Plain, funny enough, there was a leadership battle within the region. So it took a while to get that particular region onboarded and to green status. Then we've also, based on all the performance standards that we've developed, we needed a calibration period to test that we were being fair and adjust the standards where required. One example would be the 80-kilometer rule that industry needs. That's the minimum amount of kilometers that they need to travel a day. We've had to adjust it on certain routes because certain routes were a lot shorter. So that's one example of the calibration period and what we found. And then obviously, lastly, the violence and illegal operations, specifically over the last couple of weeks, has slowed progress down for the two particular regions, but it's also allowed government to develop a standard operating procedure to be implemented during this kind of unrest. This is really just an indication of the 20 steps that each operator needs to go through in order to do business with government. So there's 20 steps. This particular graphic is in your presentation, so I won't go through it, but it just highlights everything that the industry or the participant needs to do. To date, we have about 940 operating licenses registered on our portal, which means there's about 622 meeting the requirements for green status. Participants are paid, but they're also punished. So since the 15th of May, there were operators that were eligible for payment and that have been paid subsequently, but there's also those that haven't played in terms of the rules, and specifically over this period, it would be Kata and Kadeta, and they were placed in red status, which had an impact on the provincial company, UTS. So all of them were placed in red status until the unrest was resolved. In terms of a way forward, Chairperson, the service will be monitored and evaluated on an ongoing basis. We work and continue to work on a daily basis with all the companies, operators and drivers. My team is out there on a daily basis to ensure that there is shift in behavior, and we've seen some good feedback already. At the same time, we are continuing our engagement with our National Department of Transport to continue to secure their support and hopefully funding for the project outside of the pilot. And I have rushed through that a little bit. I'm just going to go on to the quick briefing. It's a few slides on the Red Dot service. As we've briefed the committee before, this Red Dot taxi service was established by the Western Cape government to support the fight against COVID-19. We had established quarantine and isolation facilities, and we needed a way of getting people from their homes to these particular facilities. So it was really a partnership between the Department of Health as well as Department of Transport and Public Works. And then we enlisted the services of the minibus taxi industry to provide this particular service. The service is made up of 4 elements. It's what we refer to as the Red Dot Light service. This was really just the transporting of nurses and other public sector healthcare workers in the evening from their healthcare facilities to their homes. And this was particularly needed under lockdown level 5 and 4, where as a result of the curfew, public transport would generally stop anytime from 7 o'clock, and that's when a lot of the nurses' shifts end. In terms of movement to quarantine and isolation facilities, this is what's called our Red Dot Q&I service. So we register the passenger on a particular system managed through the Disaster Management Center. And in that way, we know where patients need to be picked up from their homes and taken to facilities across the province. We then also were asked to assist the Department of Health with what we then refer to, or they refer to as a Red Dot Like service. And this was specifically, I think it was towards the end of the first and start of the second wave, where they were having challenges discharging patients because there was no transport to get the patients home and they needed to free up beds. So we assisted with that service as well. And then more recently, we've also started assisting with taking healthcare workers and citizens to the various vaccination sites. The service was delivered through a contact between, as mentioned, between the Western Cape government and the minibus taxi industry. Sintaka Western Cape established, as mentioned before, Umanyana Travel Services, which means unity, to provide this particular service. The initial fleet was made up of about 250 dedicated vehicles at the height of the service. It was fitted with a protective screen and a tracker. It was branded with a red dot sticker, and only the maximum capacity allowed in any vehicle was 50%. After every trip, the vehicle is cleaned and sanitized. There's hand sanitizer available in the vehicle. There was very specific training provided to the drivers so that they could understand the application that was developed and how to where to pick up and drop off passengers. The Red Dot Light service, which is the healthcare worker service, was initially across 25 healthcare facilities, which included Grootskeur, Red Cross, Children's Hospital, Tygerbergs, etc. We would transport approximately 1,000 healthcare workers daily. In total, the service transported over 200,000 passengers. The Red Dot Light continues to provide transport to healthcare workers, but specifically at the Brackengate facility, where there isn't any available public transport, and we are transporting approximately 240 passengers per day, so it's a drop-off and pick-up service. Then from a Red Dot Q&I and like and vaccine services, which are still operational, we have transported over 2,000 for the like service and over 5,000 for the vaccine service. The current fleet has been reduced from 250 and we're operating on about 130 vehicles now, Chair. That is it in a nutshell. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Can we get the last presentation?
Thank you, Chair and members. Minister, can I just first check, Chair, can you see the slides?
Yes, I can. If you just put it on presentation mode, there you are.
Yeah, thank you very much. Is it? Yeah, it is in presentation mode. Thank you, Chair. Chair, of course, we did do a detailed presentation to the Standing Committee on the taxi violence as it was unfolding. This presentation really is just to update you on where we currently are. I'll start off with the stats on taxi-related crimes. As you can see, the number of murders, attempted murders, have been stable since the interventions were initiated by our department and Minister Mitchell. There were a couple of incidents which I must emphasize. These are not statistics that are officially provided by the SAPS, and these cases after the 31st of July, on the 31st of July and the 4th of August still need to be confirmed by the SAPS as being linked to taxi violence specifically. But as you can see from the graph, it has stabilized in terms of the violent conflict. So from the 23rd of July, the intervention...
So, Mr. Ahmed, your slide is not moving. It's still on the first slide.
Chair, is it still frozen?
There you are, just move now.
Okay.
Go to the next slide.
Okay, so we're now on integrated interventions. Chair, can you see that slide?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. My apology, my connection today is very bad. From the 23rd of July, Minister Mitchell published regulations for the closure of ranks and routes after having considered two representations that were received after his intention was published on the 9th of July. There was a transport contingency plan that was presented to the SAPS and to the enforcement authorities that was drawn up by the transport departments in Drakenstein and the city of Cape Town. Also, very importantly, before the ranks and the route were closed, there was an integrated stabilization plan that was by the Transport Priority Committee, which is comprised of the SAPS, our department, the municipalities and law enforcement officials. And that stabilization plan included the deployment of the SAPS, the Army, law enforcement and traffic authorities. You may recall there was an intervention or an attempted intervention by SAFTU and the UDM with Qatar leadership, firstly separately, and then they met with them jointly. That process unfortunately did not lead to a signed peace agreement or ceasefire agreement as was hoped. The Section 91 notice that I mentioned earlier on that was published on the 9th of July was the notice of intention, where Minister Mitchell made known his intentions to define certain areas in which extraordinary measures could be taken, including the closure of routes and ranks in consultation with the SAPS and the planning authorities. Now, this is specifically done in areas where violent conflict could impact on the safety of commuters, which is central to all of the actions that were taken. Legal advisory services were involved right from the start to ensure that we were aligned to the applicable legislation. Affected parties were given until the 16th of July to make representations. We received 2. Minister Mitchell considered those 2 representations, one from Qatar and one from, slips my mind now, but both those representations were considered and responded to. Our department, City of Cape Town and Drakensberg officials prepared the transport contingency plan, which I mentioned, and then the regulations to close the ranks and the route were published on Friday, the 23rd of July, 2021. Now, the contingency plan, if I could just quickly focus on that, it firstly stated the status quo with regards to the impact that it was having on communities and commuters, the operational contingency plan, the proposed operational plan, to fill in the gap that would be left by the closure of the route for minibus taxi operations, enforcement and access control on the route and at the closed ranks, a communication plan, and then also risk assessment. In terms of additional or public transport contingency, additional rail was made available by PRASA. Area North train trips increased from 14 to 45. Additional buses, Golden Arrow increased their number of buses from 1 to 9 buses eventually in the morning peak and the afternoon peak, and also our department provided secure parking for those buses at our offices at the District Roads Engineer in Paarl. Now, with all of what we did, we ensured that we were working within the law and complied with all applicable legislation. So even the buses that were operating in lieu of the minibus taxis that were suspended, those buses were issued with operating licenses in terms of Section 74(7) of the National Land Transport Act. Access control at the Belleville interchange, where a number of lanes were closed. There would still be legal taxis allowed to operate at the rank, and those taxis needed to be identifiable, and for that access control cards were issued. The communication plan included social media posters at the ranks to inform commuters that the minibus taxi services were suspended and that they could use buses and trains that were made available as part of the contingency plan. We also sent letters to all associations to explain the closure and the operational plans so that they would not fall foul of the law and say they did not know. So this was the access control cards that were issued, and it worked fairly well. And in fact, we are looking to continue rolling out such access cards to other ranks as well. That is with the City of Cape Town. Now, on the 27th of July, the arbitration process for Route B97, which is the contentious route, that started. It started a day late, but that was as a result of a court-approved interpreter who perhaps did not get, there was some miscommunication with the interpreter. CODETA, on the 27th of July, also formally informed stakeholders, including our department, that the affiliates would resume services on the 29th of July, which in fact they did. Santaco, the national office, abandoned plans to host talks with Santaco, Kata and Codeta, after Codeta withdrew following a shooting incident. On the 29th of July, we of course did the briefing to yourselves, to this committee. Now on Friday, the 30th of July, Chair, our department's officials met with Kata leadership at our offices in Athlone to make a last attempt to get them to find a bridging agreement on Route B97. The arbitration process would still run its course, but we wanted to get to some sort of bridging agreement, but specifically to a ceasefire agreement. So that meeting was with Kata on the Friday night, late into the night. On the Saturday morning early, our officials went to Khayelitsha to meet with the Codeta leadership. And then on Sunday, the 1st of August, Minister Mitchell and Minister Mbalula met with the parties in Cape Town for final facilitated talks to find a bridging agreement. By Monday, the 2nd of August, it was clear that the parties, when it came to Route B97, were not able to find common ground, not even for a bridging agreement that would lead them to share the route. They were prepared to throw all in and agreed to abide by the arbitration an agreement on a ceasefire and the resumption of services. Bearing in mind, these operators are issued with operating licenses in terms of which they are supposed to provide a public transport service. In terms of the agreement that was drawn up, all legal operating license holders must resume services on all routes, bar route. Instruct their members to resume service. Affected municipalities would be requested to place a moratorium on the issuance of new operating license authorities, and also to look at rationalizing services on all the routes. Operating licenses for Route B97 would be apportioned based on the arbitration award. This is now what the parties would agree to. The Registrar's Office would continue with Section 7820 inquiries into the Code of Conduct breaches by specifically Kata and Codeta. For this, independent assessors were appointed. All routes will be suspended in the event of further violence. Now, we put this into the agreement, Chair, because we needed Kata and Codeta to commit to ensuring that this peace agreement holds, and it was made clear that if there was any further incidents of violence, not just on this route, that there would be consequences. Any other association involved may also similarly be suspended. No further affiliations to mother bodies. That was agreed to by the two mother bodies, in fact. The SAPS would be requested to open an inquiry in terms of the Prevention of Organised Crime Act and to prioritize cases for investigations, those cases of murder, attempted murder, and other taxi violence related cases. Law enforcement capacity would be reviewed and strengthened where necessary, specifically in hotspot zones, Bellville, Nyanga, Langa, Khayelitsha. There were complaints by the minibus taxi leadership of corruption and favoritism by enforcement authorities and officials at the PRE. Those would be investigated based on evidence that we've asked the leaders to submit to us. Those were all part of the agreement, and that was the signing. We have there the chairman of the president of Codeta, the president of Kata, Minister Mbalula, Minister Mitchell, of course, Mr. Nazim Abdurrahman, the chairman of Santaco. What was, of course, troubling for us was the very next day, on the 4th of August, a Codeta driver was shot and killed at the Milnerton rank. What was reassuring again, though, was that Codeta immediately addressed the media to confirm the peace agreement was still intact. The case is being investigated, but Codeta said that it was part of a long-standing dispute within within the association itself in Milnerton. On Friday, the 6th of August, Minister Mitchell published an amendment of the notice of extraordinary measures in declared areas, and then reopened the lanes for Carter and Kudita to once again operate from and to the Belleville rank. What's also again reassuring to us is that Kudita, who were refusing to operate from within the rank, then moved their operations back into the rank. Route B97 remains suspended. That's the route between Mbekweni and Belleville. And the ranks in Paarl and in Mbekweni also remain closed. I must emphasize, Chair, that the SAPS Army and law enforcement deployment around Belleville and along the key routes will be maintained for now, and we are still meeting on a daily basis with the SAPS to coordinate enforcement initiatives and also to brief the SAPS and enforcement authorities on any further developments and answer any questions that they have with regards to legal and illegal operations. Thank you, Chair, members.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go straight into questions. Members, can you have your hands up, please? I think it was very informative, Mr. Ahmed. Thank you for the information. I know some members have seen this presentation before. Can I just ask from my side, what is the latest going forward for B97 to be reopened? And then I saw member America and then member Heron. Member America?
Thank you, Chair. I didn't get a sense of where we are with the arbitration process. Had it been concluded, or what's the status of that engagement? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member Heron.
Thanks, Chair. I have a question about Blue Dot and Red Dot. Is that okay?
Yes, you can go quickly.
Yeah, so I think for both of those services, I mean, I think the concept. But my worry is the claim, certainly for the Blue Dot, that it will help with the reduction of violence in the taxi industry. And my worry is really pinned to the fact that only a small portion of the taxi operators are benefiting from this, from these interventions or these programs. And so you have I mean, I already am getting complaints from taxi operators who feel that they are being excluded, that their leadership are taking all of the opportunities, that there's no opportunity for them to access this additional funding, which they say is in Blue Dot it's like 20,000 Rand a month. And in Red Dot, they tell me it's up to 100,000 Rand per month. I don't know if that's correct. But I think that my worry is about whether this, and I raised it in our last meeting, whether Blue Dot and Red Dot doesn't have the potential to create tensions in the taxi industry, given that it doesn't apply to everybody, and that there are already complaints from within the industry that the association leadership, who seem to be the leadership in Umanyano travel services, are the ones who are benefiting from this. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Mvimbi.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. On the Blue Dot, Chairperson, I see there's about, it said that is about 1,300 taxis, of which the allocation is 250 to the non-metro. But then it says that, I just want to check then in the metro, that means the whole 1,050 is being allocated in the metro, because it just says that metro regions. And I just want to check whether how many regions do we have in the metro, because that means that, is that the case, then that means that Southern Cape, Central Karoo, Holland, Overberg, and West Coast, are they getting 250 of the Blue Dots allocation? And I just want to check, I think as members we are entitled to that information. What is the financial allocation to Blue Dot and to Red Dot? the financial allocation. If we are participating on it, how much do you get? And I also want to check whether have you had instances where you have to withdraw this allocation apart from the violence now that has been used as the reason for withdrawing some of the allocation. Have there been any incidents of withdrawal of this allocation of blue dot or red dot from the taxis? And maybe what might have been the cause of that? Now, I also maybe similarly to that, are there any instances where areas have not been allocated blue dot? For example, a town like Plettenberg Bay or George, has there been instances whereby the whole town has not been allocated these? That's on blue dot and red dots.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask on violence. Can I ask on taxi violence?
You can quickly go, yeah?
Okay, there was a comprehensive document that was presented last time, I think by Mr. Ahmed. And I requested that because that document at the end, it actually had some kind of a program, or what I will call a program of action, or some kind of proposed way forward. And I think it was going to assist if we can actually use that document as a monitoring document, because it really outlined quite nicely what needs to be done going forward. Is it possible that we can be given that document? I asked the last time and then it has not been given to us, because it was going to assist us even on this meeting to check whether some of the things that have been mentioned there have been done or have then been complied with. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Mr. van der Westhuizen.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you to colleague Honourable Wimby for the question regarding the financial incentive. I would also like to know what is the monthly cost to the province for this pilot per taxi that's been contracted. The second one is just, it seems as if, and that amounts to the numbers that Honourable Mvimbi has just referred to, as if the province has said, listen, there are so many that we can fund at this point in time, and please submit the names of operators with their vehicle registration details who would like to take part in this pilot. Now, it seems to me as if in many cases the elected leaders of the various, be it companies or regions, then jumped at this opportunity for their own benefit, and that these contracts were not handed out evenly or allocated on a competitive basis to the various operators. And this has led to some unhappiness within the taxi industry. My question is, can we, in future phases of this, develop a system whereby the opportunity to take part in the red dot and the blue dot system, that opportunity would be distributed in a fair and equal way, or by fair competition, be it then that, you know, all the names be drawn out of a hat or something like that, but that certain people don't find themselves in an advantaged position, whereas others are completely excluded. That's my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member van der Westhuizen. The HOD Junior team can respond.
Chair, thank you very much, and thank you to the members of the committee for the question. If I may, I'd like to ask Mr. Ahmed to pick up on the questions that have been posed regarding the process around B97, Chair, that you asked, as well as then the status regarding the arbitration. And then just to flag the presentation that Mr. Ahmed made in the last meeting, he did send through, as far as I can recall, through to the committee coordinator. So that should be available for the members of the committee, if that's what Member Mvimbi was referring to, in terms of the query that was asked about that one, Chair. And then after Mr. Ahmed has finished, potentially then for Mrs. Ribbenard to pick up on the bulk of the questions around Blue Dot and Red Dot, and I'll pick up if there's anything else that needs to be flagged. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Ahmed?
So while Mr. Ahmed is getting ready, I see Member Nomin Kondlo is also here. She put up a hand. Member Kondlo, do you want to go quickly?
Yeah, yes, Chairperson. I just wanted, I think on the last presentation on taxi violence, I just wanted to check in the arbitration process. I'm not sure whether it has been concluded by now, but my question is,
Member Kondlo, we can't hear you properly. The reception is very poor, so you keep on cutting off. Member Kondlo, we can't hear the question. Can I ask you to please, if you don't mind, put the question in the message chat,
is
please?
the process, and you can't hear me. Okay,
We
get my
can't hear
questions
you.
on the chat then.
Please, Member Kondlo, thank you very much. I appreciate that. You can go, Mr. Ahmed.
Chair, my apology, I also got thrown out of the meeting because of bad connection at some point. I'll answer those questions that I managed to note. Firstly, your question with regards to B97, I think that was also similar to what Member America asked with regards to the arbitration process. The arbitration process commenced, Chair. Let me just get that detail for you. It started on the first round of the arbitration process has been concluded, and that first round was just to brief legal representatives of all the parties, including CART and CODETA. And the hearings will resume now on the 14th to the 20th of August. That is in next week, with the witnesses that were identified by CART and CODETA giving testimony and cross-examinations by the various legal counsel. So the program has been set for the arbitration process. Bearing in mind this is a very legalistic process, it will in all likelihood go to court for a declarator, so that the decision that is made by the arbitrator is then confirmed in court, and it is legally binding on the parties. But the process, Chair, is still very much underway. The parties have agreed to abide by the decision, so that that is a very positive step in that regard. Chair, with regard to the question by Member Mvimbi, the last presentation that I made to the standing committee, the slides are with Mr. Kutsia. If it was sent through to Mr. Kutsia, and it should be available to Mr. Mvimbi if he requests. If he has not got it, then he can. I'll also gladly forward it to him if needs be. Thank you, Chair. I didn't catch the question of Member Mkondlo. Let me just see here which are these routes allocated to.
If I may, through you, Chair, just to clarify, Mr. Ahmed, there was a question posed by the chairperson around the process to open up B97 again. What would be required in terms of assume completing the arbitration and so on, or not?
HOD, at this stage, the Section 91 notice will remain in place. I think it is just too high a risk right now, bearing in mind that we could not, after very many attempts by the national minister, our minister, to get the parties to find that bridging agreement that I was referring to in the presentation. to share operations on B97. Both parties, I think, have committed themselves to abiding by the outcome of the arbitration process, and it does not seem that they are prepared to share the route or to come to some sort of agreement amongst themselves, even though our officials were on hand, our officials from the PRE were on hand to legalize whatever agreement was reached with regards to operators who would then be issued with additional operating licenses on that route. So at this stage, we will wait for the arbitration process to be concluded before, unless of course the parties out of their own come forward and say that they have come to some sort of a bridging agreement. Thank you.
Chairperson, may I continue?
Hello.
May I start my response?
Yes, that you can go.
Thank you, Chairperson. Just in terms of Member Heron's questions around, the claims that people are being left out, I suppose it also references Member Mavimbi's question. So there was 1,300 slots for the pilot. There are upwards about 20,000 operators, so definitely not everybody is going to get a slot in this pilot. What happened is that there are 8 regions, Member Mavimbi, in the province, 6 in the metro and 2 in the non-metro. So the West Coast is included in Boerland, so that's Overberg. They are included, and then you have the Eden region. And then the 6 other metro regions being Carter, Cadetta, Mitchell's Plain, Two Oceans, Greater Cape, and I forget the 6th one now, Northern, sorry. So those are the 8 regions in the province. Each region in the metro was allocated 200 slots of the 1,300, and the 2 non-metro was allocated 50-50 each. The principle of who decides on the routes. We had a principle that we would like to cover a full route. So that if you have 200, get to a route that has very close to 200, or a combination of routes that can add up to 200, so that one can feel the impact. You don't want necessarily to have a blue dot and a non-blue dot vehicle on the same route. So we wanted it from a monitoring perspective, that principle was set. So industry, in terms of each region, because we met with each region and each region's representative association, so either the chairperson and secretary of each association, in terms of each region, met with us collectively, and we explained the principle of it being a pilot, that there will be people excluded in terms of the pilot, and that as leadership of the region, they need to decide on which routes they will then present to government. So we then vet the routes once they've decided in meetings that are minuted, which routes will be taken. Obviously, there's going to be people that are going to feel disgruntled. We had particular issue in Mitchell's Plain, but there was really a leadership battle there. And then in the Boerland non-metro district, because the Boerland region established their company, and there are Carter and Cadetta affiliated members in that Boerland region, Boerland decided that they should form part of the Carter or Cadetta company and not necessarily Boerland. So that there was some unhappiness in that regard. In terms of Member Heron's question around the monetary value, it is definitely not 100K for the red dot. The service, apologies, the service to commandeer the vehicle is 42,000 Rand. So what we did, and as presented in the previous briefing to the committee, we showed how that number was made up. We did an analysis in terms of going to GMT or going to hire a vehicle at Avers plus a driver, and what that amount would be versus what the red dot fleet is costing us. In terms of blue dot, the maximum amount that an operator can generate, you have to have 5 stars every day, which is highly unlikely. I think in this 2 months, there's only been 10% of operators that's managed that. The maximum value a month is 10,000 Rand. Then in terms of the RCs and UTS, it's a build-up. So the better your region performs, the better your monetary allocation or incentive is. Then in terms of member van der Westhuizen, I think that sort of covered Member Nkondlo's question around how's routes allocated, etc. And then in terms of Member Mavimbi's question around is there towns excluded? Absolutely, Member Mavimbi. 1,300 is only going to stretch so far. So there's definitely George was excluded because they do benefit from a government program being the Go George service. So there are definitely towns that's excluded because there just isn't enough to go around. I take Member van der Westhuizen's point around allocation in future. It really is budget dependent, and we do work with industry to ensure fairness in terms of allocation. We must also be careful of dictating to the very last detail in terms of who gets what. We make sure that the allocation is equal amongst regions as a start. But I do take your point in terms of future expansion and that new operators are brought in and not the existing kept. There would be challenges with that. Let's, for argument's sake, say we were to continue with the pilot for a longer period. If we were to include newer members and drop the old, there would be a cost to government to decommission vehicles, recommission in terms of trackers and branding, etc. But the point is well made. Chairperson, I think I covered all the questions. Oh, and then the issue of UTS benefiting, I mean, that's Santaco leadership. They worked with the regions to allocate the slots equally across the regions, Member Heron. So I think that concludes all the questions. Thank you, Chair.
You did, and you covered Member Nkondlo's questions as well. If anything is not answered, we will put it in our resolutions as well. But I must say thank you very much. We've kept you here for 2 hours today, despite your work being so busy. And we will send more questions in detail of what we need. And we did get the presentations that you sent. I'll just speak to Member Mvimbi after the meeting to see what other documents they need. And if so required, we'll send it through to the normal processes. But thank you and the team, Minister Mitchell and your team. Thank you very much for coming through as always. We did ask Santaco also to come give us a few minutes update, but I don't see Nazim here. But I think you've covered that as well. So that's all we wanted. We just wanted to know what is the latest in the taxi industry and what's happening. But you've covered that from my perspective. So thank you very much for coming through. Members will just stay behind for our resolutions.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Colleagues, okay, because there was 4 big presentations and perhaps you didn't type up all your resolutions. Can I ask you to, by end of tomorrow or by Thursday, send through the resolutions that you'd like to take from this meeting and the recommendation of documents? Is that acceptable?
Yes.
That's good, Chair.
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. van der Westhuizen?
Yes, no, that is good, Chair. As you manage this, can I just say that I feel some of our questions were not answered. Unfortunately, we didn't get an opportunity to, remind the officials of that. And I propose then that such questions also form the basis of some of the follow-up questions. Thank you.
Of course, you're welcome to do that. We can also submit parliamentary questions, as you know, but I get the point that you're trying to make. Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. There's nothing further on this.
Chairperson.
Sorry, Mr. Mvimbi.
Yes, just on the issue of that document, Because why really I wanted the document is because, especially in line with your proposal the last time, that if we can have this item of taxi violence for the next maybe 6 weeks, I think that document was clearly outlining what can be done moving forward. That's really the reason I was so interested in it. So if it was sent to me, I will definitely go and check again.
You can just check, Mr. Mvimbi, if the document was in the presentation, it would be in, because that presentation was sent out. But if there's a particular document, of course, we can ask for it.
No problem. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, colleagues. There was no minutes of the previous meeting, so this meeting is then officially adjourned.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Johannes, for your help. Much appreciated, Namfundo, and Johan Vermeulen. Thank you very much as well.